So to get started, let me just introduce to you the speakers for the webinar today. First of all, Jim Dickie is the managing partner at CSO Insights. Also with us is Marc McNamara, who's the chief content strategist at the Value Shift. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Jim Dickie with CSO Insights.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks everybody for joining us today on this session. I can't believe we're already into March. This year is already starting off like a lion, and we're going out there and trying to go out and sell more effectively in the marketplace. And one of the things that we're seeing right now is if there was ever a time that selling was easy, now is not it. Let me share with you some data from our most recent sales performance optimization study. Now, this is a study we've been doing for 22 years now, where we go out and survey 1,000+ companies, around the world, predominantly in the B2B space, multiple industries though. And what we're really trying to find is what are the challenges facing sales teams, why those problems exist, but more importantly, what do you do about it? How can you leverage people, process, technology, and knowledge differently to really increase sales effectiveness? Now, to go back in those studies, because we've got data over a long period of time, if we go back to 2009, we really saw sales performance tank. The 77.9% number here is the average overall plan attainment that we saw across the 1,000+ companies we surveyed in terms of what happened to them in 2008. We understand at the end of that year, the economy tanked all the way around the world. Sales ran into, just roadblocks on, how do I close deals? And it really did impact, sales effectiveness. We just saw a plummeting in the overall plan attainment. Only 51% of reps made quota that year. That's the lowest on record in the history of our study. And so people got serious about sales. And they started coming back and, okay, we've really got to start looking at what we're doing, how we're doing it. We've got to understand what the customers are doing. And as they started focusing on increasing their visibility into the sales cycle, things got better, to the point where we actually got back up to 89.2% of overall plan attainment in 2012. Now, a lot of people sit there and say, how come we didn't get to 100? Most companies over-assign quotas. So the actual number that they're telling Wall Street is not the overall plan number. But you can see here there was a good increase. We got back up. People started hitting it. And again, we got back to where 62% of reps were making quota, up from that 51% number. But then all of a sudden, something started to happen the last couple of years. Maybe we got a little complacent. Maybe we're not focused as much as we should. But in our last study that we just completed and released in February 1st of this year, we're back down to 81.4% of overall plan attainment. So clearly, something's happening in the sales process today, or in the buying process, or the way we're engaging customers, because we're just not as effective as we need to be. Yet in the face of those numbers, I want to share with you that 94.5% of the companies we surveyed said we're raising our revenue targets for 2015. And sometimes I feel like I'm the coach of a high jump team, where my guys are struggling to clear 6 feet, and I'm going to raise the bar to 6'6". So what do I expect to happen? The guys who are struggling aren't going to make it. Some of the guys who are just clearing it aren't going to make it. So it's really this issue of what's going to be different. So the key thing is we spent a lot of time at the end of last year figuring out what the number was going to be for 2015. I wonder how many companies spent time figuring out how their reps were going to achieve that number, because that's really the struggling issue, is how are you going to make it?
And I'll tell you, Jim, it's Mark, obviously, but I'm seeing now, engaging with customers in 2015, that this melee is not gone, and in fact, in some cases, is getting worse. And they are asking the question, what do we do? What are we doing wrong? So,
yeah, I think it really is an issue of execution. And I think in sales we use a lot of sports analogies. So forgive me for doing one. But I started thinking about this in preparation for this webinar. This is all about winning the game. And so I started taking a look at, well, let's take a look at, maybe sports. Is there something we can learn from sports as an analogy for this? And something that came across as we were kind of brainstorming it around with the team was the idea of, in football, there's this thing called, the red zone. That's when you get inside your opponent's 20-yard line. And so the thing that they measure there, one of the key metrics is, did you score or not? You got close to the goal line. You should get some points on the board. What really happened? And in taking a look at the 2014 NFL schedule, went back and said, okay, who is the best professional football team at red zone effectiveness? Turns out it was the Dallas Cowboys. They had 51 times during the course of the season that they got inside of their opponent's red zone. 92.2% of the time, they got points. 17 times it was a field goal. At least it was points on the board. The rest of the time it was, a touchdown. And so that's the type of execution. When you've got a professional football team, they're going out and executing the plays exactly what you told them to do it. You know, you expect them to go in, not score all the time, but boy, score the majority of the time. So let me share with you again the numbers from the sales performance optimization study that we just finished. When we took a look at sales teams, we averaged what was the average win rate of forecast deals across all the companies we surveyed. So forecast, not pipeline. These are things where you're in the red zone. You know, you've got far enough into the process where you say, hey, I'm willing to commit this is going to win. Win rate came in at 45.9%. So half of what, you know, the Dallas Cowboys were doing in terms of their scoring efficiency. To put that in perspective, if you go down to Vegas, you walk into the Bellagio, you walk up to the craps tables, you make a bet on a pass bet at the craps tables, your odds of winning are 49.3%. And when I first heard that, I went, seriously? The odds of winning at craps are better than they are in terms of closing a forecast that, by the way, we created. So it really does give us, an issue to pause and say, what are we going to have to do to really increase the effectiveness of our teams so when they get in the red zone in the sales process, they actually end up scoring?
You know, Jim, it's interesting because that's an average, right? I'm working with one customer right now who's telling me that they get in the red zone. That's the call, right? They're forecasting they're going to close business. And last quarter, they came in 15% of the call. 15%. Ouch. Amazing.
Well, you know, that's the type of thing where you're going to be buying mail locks for the rest of your company, because how do you work in an unpredictable environment? You know, if you're the VP of Finance, how do you go and manage lines of credit? What do you tell Wall Street if you're in charge of customer support? Are we going to be implementing things for customers or not? You know, so there's just a lot of implications on that for the rest of the enterprise as well as for sales.
I know. It's amazing.
So let's take a look at one of the things. When we've been talking about what's impacting performance, we went out and we interviewed, CSOs, chief sales officers, and we said, what are the types of things you look at? And we put together kind of a composite of the input we got. And the first thing they said was, a lot of execs said, we start off by analyzing, do we have the right team? You know, do we have the right players who can go out and execute in the marketplace? They're knowledgeable, they're professional, they're able to go out and, really interact with the stakeholders they're engaging with. And if we've got that, do they have the right motivation to go do the right job? You know, do we have the compensation plans that'll get them to go outside of their comfort zone and maybe call on different types of accounts or try to sell new products? You know, and those things are there, and a lot of companies worked on that, but then it's the issue of, can they go out and actually do those things? And that's really where we find the following things, where you get into, do they have the right skills? You know, have we given them the right training that they know what to do? Do they have the right tools that they can go out and do those types of things? They're doing the right execution, are they following the procedures on that? Or are they getting the right coaching from their managers? And are we taking a look at lessons learned so we can have the right evolution and change this thing going forward? So there are a lot of things to look at. The key thing is, what are the areas that are really impacting performance today? And so let me go into a little bit of something that a lot of companies have been investing in. We've seen the amount of money that people have invested in sales training, sales methodologies go up significantly. But let's take a look at really what's happening there. Because, I look at sales methodologies as being the easy part of the equation, if there is an easy part, because it's the what of selling. So we're talking now, you see all these things where people want their sales force to be challenging or visioning or co-creating, whatever it is. A whole lot of different things, but basically it boils down to this. What we want you to do is call high. If you're calling into a business, call high into the organization, get up to those, senior stakeholders. Once you're there, we want you to differentiate versus the competition. Why are we better than anything else you could do out there? We also want you to create a sense of urgency so that the customer says, hey, I see it and I need to do something. I need to do something now. We want you to sell value so we don't have to come back and discount it. We want to see that, hey, this is a really solid business case. If it's a fair price, we need to move ahead. So, whatever else you're looking to do in your sales process, you're telling these salespeople during training, here's what you want to do. Here's the issue. Reps are struggling with not what, but how. How do I have that discussion with a CFO that gets them to agree to meet with me? How do I differentiate between all the various competitors in the marketplace? How do I create that sense of urgency? And so, the methodologies, they give us the basic framework, but unless you're giving these people the how to do things, it's going to be a challenge. And by the way, how is harder than it's ever been before. Because when in the past, there used to be this concept of go find that main decision maker, that one person who can make the deal happen, and I don't know who that person is anymore. I have a friend of mine who's a senior vice president of a jet manufacturer. 2 years ago, his personal signature authority was $2 million if it was in budget, $1 million if it was out of budget. Today, for both of those things, it's 50 grand. So what's happened is that one decision maker has been replaced by a committee. And in fact, our study found that on average, there is a little bit over 4 decision makers involved in getting to yes. And each one of them has their own agenda. By the way, if each decision maker has an influencer that they turn to for advice, well, now you've got 8 different people that the sales team has got to go out and interact with. And I've got to get their buy-in. I've got to get total consensus on these things. And so it really is saying, we've got to come up with a different way of doing things. We just can't focus on training that says, how, because what we're finding is that, we're getting kind of negative feedback from the sales organizations. As part, again, of the sales performance study, we went back and said, what types of training are you doing and how successful is it? How effective is it? And let me share with you that in terms of product training, 50.2% of the companies that we surveyed, only 50.2% said that their product training meets or exceeds expectations. That dropped down to 45.4% of companies said that their sales skills training meets or exceeds expectations. It rose further down to 41.3% when you start talking about the messaging that you will be using when you're engaging stakeholders. Drops down to 37.5% getting passing grades on their training on business acumen and what's going on in their customers' marketplace, and drops down to 36.4% when you talk about justification of a purchase. So a lot of money being spent on training, but companies are coming back and giving themselves, they're not giving themselves A's or B's on this, it's C's or D's. And so those are the types of things where it says we've got to start figuring out a different way of training these people, of helping them do things.
Couldn't agree more.
So what I think we're seeing in the Mark, go ahead, Mark.
No. The increased complexity has only made it harder, and I think I'm going to talk about this too in terms of, are they being successful with their traditional training efforts? And the answer is no. So back to you, Jim. Sorry.
So let's take a look what better looks like, because we are seeing a growing number of companies saying, let's talk about, let's kind of get out of the box thinking on what we need to do to support our sales organization. So when you really think about it, there's a whole bunch of knowledge within your company, that's in the minds of subject matter experts. Could be other sales reps, could be sales support people, could be people in finance, manufacturing, distribution, customer support. And so the key thing on it is, how much of that is available to salespeople when they're actively selling? And the answer is often not a whole lot. They're there in the company, but there's not an easy way of getting that. And what we're seeing is this merge now of people saying, how do we take that knowledge and really blend it with technology, blend it with process, make it available to sales teams on a 24/7 basis so that they've got the access to the knowledge and the tribal wisdom of the entire enterprise to go out and sell effectively. That we're not just putting them out there on their own, that they really have the tools and the knowledge and the insights to go and execute all the different phases of the sales process. A lot of people understand conceptually that sounds like a good idea. What they struggle with is, how do we make it real? And that's why I was really excited to get back in touch with Marc McNamara recently, because he's really been one of the visionaries in how to do this for years. I saw the work they did at a number of companies, including 3M years ago, and it was really this thing of coming up with a framework for how do you go through this process. So I'm going to turn it over to Marc to present his 5-step model for how to make this happen. But beforehand, what we're going to do is go to a polling question to kind of get some feedback from you on what are the biggest sales training challenges that you all face.
Thank you, Jim. So what Jim has really laid up is that, salespeople are facing increased complexity. The traditional models, I think, of training just don't work, and we're going to get into that a little bit, because what you really have to think about is how do you make salespeople experts across the board, and merely taking your subject matter experts and putting them up in front of a classroom or creating, traditional online training just doesn't work anymore. So before we dig into that, we'd like you to take just a moment and answer the question relative to your organization, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing relative to your sales training efforts currently? So far it's looked like it's the two leaders here are, one, creating the sales training courses themselves so far. and implementing sales training technology. That's pretty interesting. And we're going to talk about that because I think in terms of the process that I can help you think about, send you on your way to think about training very differently. But let me frame this by setting up a couple of things as to why training doesn't work today, and it's an important basis in understanding the recommendations that I have. I think that what Jim laid out is very important, that there's a lot of money actually being spent on sales training today, but that executives are not very happy with that. And the reason being, and this is long-standing research, and many of you probably know this, is that when you do traditional training, 80% of what's delivered is forgotten within the first 30 days. And secondarily, you continue that time frame, and you're going to lose even more. Okay. More than that, you take that knowledge or what's been learned, and fewer than 15% of reps actually successfully apply that. So what happens is what Jim said. Only 32% of executives actually think their company sales training programs are effective in changing performance. That's a real dilemma. But why is that? It has to do with everybody taking a traditional formal approach. And we've improved on that, but as I just stated, much of what people learn in that formal approach is forgotten. It doesn't mean it isn't important. You have to onboard people, but I think you need to think differently about how you onboard them and give them foundational information that will then be used to build on that knowledge, because what you need to do is you need to transfer knowledge at the time that it's needed. And there was a woman by the name of Gloria Gary. I studied her work in the 90s, and she talked about electronic performance support systems, that as you think about sales training technology, okay, how do you get information, knowledge, and support to the salesperson at the point of need, at the point of work? Okay, a colleague of mine at HP, Carol Cohen, calls that the point of work. And what they need to do is that knowledge will turn into competency, because what you want is competency. Just having information or training someone doesn't mean they're good at what they do. They have to apply that, and by applying it at the time that they need it, when they need to remember something, when they need to adjust to a change. Think of all of those influencers in terms of the sale. That's a lot of pivot points to have to consider in the way that you communicate. And when you have to react to something that's gone wrong or fail or breaks, and you have that knowledge, that is when you can apply it and you will create competency. That's a really important point. The other thing that's going on for us right now is that technology has created a whole new environment, okay? The confluence of mobile, social, and video technologies has moved us towards a culture of actually hyper attention. These are certainly enabling technologies. They're good tools. We're making good use of them. But what it has done is put us in a position with salespeople whose focus is being switched between multiple information streams on a continuous basis and a preference for high stimulation and lower boredom tolerances. I've actually been in situations with teams where I asked salespeople to raise their hands. Some of these people are checking their email some 70 to 80 times a day, looking for that kernel, that next thing. Right? Focus is a problem. How do you deal with that? This is about attention spans shrinking, right? And I don't need to spend a lot of time. It's the same point. But by the end of this year, the average user is going to be requesting, doesn't mean they consume it, 15 hours of media per day. And this even comes with what you're watching now. This is media, right? This is a mediated program. And recently, and these statistics come at us all the time, that now 61% of executives are actually preferring video to reading text. I recently did a project with a large analyst firm, and their customers, buying subscriptions to information, said, don't send me another white paper. You send me another white paper and I'm canceling my subscription. They want media. They want to be able to consume. And look what this has done to our attention spans. How do you get focus of a salesperson who's already busy doing what they need to do to close business, and that pressure doesn't come down, it goes up. So we have to accommodate them. We've got to put them in the position of being successful by delivering that knowledge differently. I call this learning at the speed of work, and ultimately leveraging off of what Gloria talked about, Gloria Gary, is to put in place this sales performance support system. And you can see there's a grid here. You can read this, and by the way, these slides are available to anybody who would like them post-event, just to ask. content in the way that we deliver it, knowledge in the way that we deliver it has to change. And if you look at performance support, it's a very modular, it's an entertaining way, and it has to be delivered continuously, right, at the point of need, just in time, contextually and prescriptively delivered. So when you're talking about learning technologies, we move away from the concept of LMS, and you move into more things like content management systems and databases that are more responsive to the intelligence that the salesperson is giving you, or we can be prescriptive relative to process and the way that they get things done.
Mark, I just really want to reinforce that, for the audience, because as part of our study, we asked how much change is bombarding our salespeople and what impact is it having on their performance. And they came back and taught us that, this is not just develop content and tools and all those things one time and you're done. There's so much change that's happening right now in the marketplace. Number one thing on the list was changes in customer expectations. Number two on the list was changes in my customer's marketplace. Number three was changes in the competitive landscape. And then 3, 4, and 5 were self-inflicted changes, the breadth of our product line, the complexity of our product line, or new product introductions. And so we've constantly got to be going back and getting the right information that's current into the hands of our salespeople to execute.
You bring up a great point, Jim, that I'm going to talk about later, but while you made it fresh, I've seen too many efforts in terms of training people fail, even when they're building libraries of material, because they think it's a one and done. It's a project, and it's not. This is a journey of continuous support and of doing research, pulling it in, working with your SMEs, and delivering a continuous stream of responsive information. And that's a really important thing, because all the customers I work with today who are coming to me say, well, we did this and it failed because we didn't put our muscle behind it. We didn't put our shoulder into it and make the commitment that we needed to make. And before we do this poll, I'll sort of launch into the next phase in that, this can be done, but it's about change management, right? This is about changing the way that you behave as an organization and putting a program together that you can put your muscle behind and actually commit to it. And the other thing that people will mistakenly believe, and I see this a lot, is, particularly with sales executives who, Jim, you can support this, the average chief revenue officer's lifespan in an organization is what, 2 years, maybe 3, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They want quick wins, but the problem here is that a program like this takes time. It needs to mature. So people need to make commitments to these things to see results. And I think when you pointed out, quota achievement at the beginning, you can see degradation happening because now we got to come back and do the right things, and it takes time for those things to materialize into result. So anyway, just to get back, and I'll continue talking here, if people want to take a moment and answer this next question, I think the poll is open. And I'm curious of how much of your sales support is actually mobile today. And this is critical to the strategy that I'm going to talk about being able to implement. So, and so far the results don't surprise me. I'm seeing that the majority of people don't actually have a lot of mobile content. And I think that's going to impact us really hard as we move forward here.
Well, I'll share with you something, Mark, that as part of the study we asked, are your reps carrying mobile devices that have access to, corporate systems? And it's up to 74% are saying yes. And then we said, well, what are you doing with it? And okay, we're checking email. We're checking our
Right.
calendar.
Right.
And it's like, that's it? You got so much capabilities now, especially with tablets. And all you're doing is doing efficiency things. So there's a lot of devices out there, but they're really being underutilized.
They are, and I've got some great stories in terms of customers that are starting to utilize mobile very differently. Particularly, I'll share one very quickly, in that the ability to go into a car and while a rep is driving from one location to another, actually learn, right? Pull up a piece of content and listen to it on the car radio, because of Bluetooth. And I'm showing companies how to do that more effectively by creating mobile-ready content and putting it into, an app that's accessible even on the smartphone. So what I want to talk about is sort of 5 key milestones and steps that you can take to be successful in putting a sales performance support system together. And it's really quite simple. First of all, you want to establish clear targets of content to be created. And I'm going to go into each one of these briefly as we head in. Secondly, you want to facilitate a collaborative content creation process, and that really speaks to what you were talking about, Jim, in terms of working with your SMEs to get them to empty their pockets, right? You want to organize and manage content in libraries and really do some unified content management with categories and tags. And you want to systemize your content delivery and measurement through a clear delivery architecture. And then last but not least is you have to apply the resources to manage this programmatically. It's not that one and done. You've got a lot of work to do to support sales, communicate, and gain adoption of what can be a very, very powerful solution. Okay, so let me get into the first point, which is to establish clear content targets. So this is where most people get off on the wrong foot. And when you think about what you're trying to do, I don't want you to make the mistake of starting with the content you have, because that's not what it's about. You're going to make some poor decisions if you take what you have and merely reorganize it. Now, don't get me wrong, you want to leverage existing assets at the right time, but you don't use your current inventory of training and support to make the decisions of what you should be creating, right? You want to establish your targets, okay, and work backwards from those goals, because then you're going to find gaps and you're going to fill in those gaps. So you want to look at your processes, right? For marketing, they look at their buying processes, the customer buying processes. You want to look at your sales process and methodology, and you want to get in and talk to sales. You know, sales is your consumer of this stuff, right? And don't think about a trainer, what you need to know. You want to go to sales and say, what is it that you're missing? What can we help you with? Okay, and have them help guide you, and then talk to the SMEs as well. And you will come up with a model. What I have on the screen is a typical high-level sales content model that I put out for customers so that they can see, oh, these are the buckets. Now, how do I start creating these elements for my people to be successful? Another way to look at this is, again, don't think like a trainer, right? This is breakthrough time. Start with tasks and things that they need to do. And a very simple breakdown model is to think of, you know, you've got knowledge. Knowledge helps create competency. You need references, right? Meaning resources to use in that knowledge. Concepts, break down things into steps, and align it to process, explain process. All of that creates an environment of supporting them in context in which they can use this information. The next piece, and I saw in the polling that many people were talking about having trouble creating the right content or getting SMEs to help, okay? And what you need to do is, given the technology, is put a process in place that's very facilitative to source that knowledge, right? You now have to think of yourself as a publisher, right? You have to be able to get the stories in, you have to be able to pull that in, and then you have to create a narrative around that and build the final content that sales will use. This isn't about authoring or creating training programs, okay? But it's about rolling up knowledge from SMEs across the company and taking their input and turning it into meaningful, dynamic content. And the other thing to do is think about it from an elemental perspective. And what I mean by that is, we often think about, oh, I got to build a big piece of content. No, start with a kernel, right? Think of it as sort of at a molecular level, right? Or a slide. If somebody can give you one slide of information, you can collect multiple slides and create modules. And from multiple modules, you create programs. So if you really go to the elemental and look for knowledge at its most molecular level, you'll be able to pull things out and start to massage it, right? And not only your SMEs, but look to your sales leaders. I ran a program at Hewlett-Packard with a woman I just mentioned previously, Carol Cohen, and the most effective knowledge sourcing program we ran was the Ring the Bell. Now, not the typical ring the bell, hey, I sold this to this company for that amount of money, but more importantly, we challenged the sales leaders to actually state what they did to win that deal. So challenge them, give them a slide or a questionnaire, and pull the information out. This is where you're going to get this stuff, right? 2, open up the suggestion box, right? There's a lot of collaborative technology you can use to say, send me questions, suggestions, forward content from within and without the company. And you can gestate that and you'll build it into meaningful stuff. Right. Next, organize it well. And this is something that really falls apart in the efforts that I see with most companies. It's actually in many, from a conceptual standpoint, it's easy, meaning, oh, geez, I can organize this stuff. But again, it's not organized in a file structure anymore. This isn't folders and subfolders. This is categorizing content, right? And metadata that makes it findable, targetable, and prescriptive when you put it in the right technology. So what you need to think about is a set of standards by which you will manage this, right? And many organizations break down where they start to think about how they democratize this process and post the content and put any tag and put it anywhere that you want. I've worked on those projects and they fall apart because you lose structure and you lose context that sales will understand. You know, salespeople are smart, but in many cases we have to spoon feed them, right? We don't want them searching for things all over the place. This is the key to make it findable for them and even prescriptive in the context of how you're going to deliver it. Think about standards around how you title things, how you create a description that provides meaning to someone before they open it, reduce the amount of clicks, right? And think about this through that elemental perspective of slides to modules to programs and classifying all of that material. Right? If you put your mind to it, you can create a map that's going to allow you to categorize this stuff along the way that people want to use it and tag it appropriately against the content model so that people will create habits on how they can get this into their hands quickly and easily and from the standpoint of relevance. Because the technology is going to move you into an area where it will be prescriptive. I'm working on projects now where if you categorize and tag appropriately, content will fall into the hands of the salesperson relative to the task that they're performing, the CRM that they're in the middle of, and the opportunity that they've opened. Mm-hmm. Next, and this is about the technology and how to think about it, is to systemize this content delivery. And I've talked a little bit about that in the last section. But related to it too is that you have to measure it in order to know that what you're doing is effective. And when we do traditional training, we had a lot of training measurements. You know, was the instructor good? Did people pay attention? Did they pass the quiz? You know, now we're into the concept of are the sales executives using this content? How does that relate to the process you have in place? When they consume content, do they perform better? You can start to look at that correlation between the content you deliver and their performance as individuals. And there's a lot of platforms to do this, not the least of which is Salesforce, which many people have. They're just not used to using it in this regard, but there's a lot of tools and the ability to architect this in such a way. And there's third-party tools that are coming around too, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about those, not the least of which is Bloomfire, which can help you accomplish that measurement piece, okay? So, you know, you want to look at centralizing your content so that you can manage it well, and you want to be able to measure it. So that key is to integrate this architecture into the place where your salespeople are going, and the most obvious place is the CRM. Okay, don't get fooled by just having a portal and populating a portal that this will bring success for you. I've seen too many portal projects fall apart. Okay, so sorry, I should have advanced that earlier, but it is about distributing and tracking, because all of that's going to come into play in order to optimize this appropriately. Now the last point, and one that I feel is the most important, because people, process, and technology, we have a lot of that, but it's really about a program, right? You take these 4 elements in front of this major point, and you've got to make a commitment to focus on this to deliver an ongoing sales performance support system. And systemization is really the key, but systems don't occur without process. right? Jim even said it, I just said it, process is the key. How do you manage this? And I think you've got to pay attention to, given what those 4 elements we just talked about, what are the resources that you need to make that happen? What is the technology you're going to use? What will it take to architect it correctly? Then, who's managing this program? Do you have, a librarian or an administrator, a trainer or a curator of this content to make sure that you're acquiring it and moving it forward? And then last but not least is, who's the program manager? Okay? Just because you build it, it doesn't mean your salespeople will use it. You've got to train them and orient them on what they have their hands on and make them comfortable. And you've got to do that in an incremental fashion. You just can't blast it out there and expect them to, all of a sudden be successful finding and using content. But if you launch it appropriately and communicate regularly and ask for feedback from the team on how to improve it, you'll be successful. And this turns into an ongoing process that optimization will support to keep this going. This is, as Jim made the point and I make the point, this is a continuous, ongoing journey. Content continues and keeps going throughout the entire life cycle. So I know we're getting pressed for time, and I want to cap on here and just remind you that these were the 5 steps, and we're going to open it up to questions in just a moment. But again, I'm happy to share any of this material with people who would like to have it, or even have a conversation if that's appropriate for anybody there. So with that, Jim, any more comments before we open it up out to the audience to ask them what they might be thinking and feeling?
Well, I just appreciate you kind of sharing, the recipe for success, because I think a lot of us, know what we need to do. We're struggling with how to do it, and I think you've got the type of framework that anybody can apply.
Excellent.
Well, I just think, we've got to start, getting some science around this, the way that we're selling. We've got to start get some standardization, and we've got to make sure that people have the right information to use with the right stakeholders at the right stage in the sales process. And I think if we start doing that, we're going to find that, they're much more effective in the marketplace at really engaging stakeholders. And I think we can turn how we sell into that competitive edge in the market.
I agree, and I'm excited that, the tools have matured, processes matured, and I think we have a great opportunity to really help salespeople change the way that they're selling today. So, thanks everybody.